Yeah, thank you very much for the kind introduction, also for the invitation to speak here at this interesting conference. And yeah, I will basically try to give you an overview how the German research organizations and institutions have worked on this long-known problem of this dual-use side of science and science results, methods, and so on, which means basically there is a benefit on the one side and almost always some kind of risk on the other side. And this process that I'm involved in within my work in the office of the National Academy of Sciences Leopoldina has lasted now about 10 years. And I try to give you some of the initial insights, how that started and what's happened in the science organizations since then in Germany. And I will also try to bridge to the topic of this conference, this geopolitical polarization, which basically means that there's a lot of political pressure built up on the sciences, which makes open science or free research more and more difficult nowadays. Yeah, and this is what I just tried to line out. So there's this area of tension. There's free research on the one hand, which is at least believed in the Western countries is essential for scientific progress because it helps or allows scientists to raise their own questions, address them independently, exchange freely results and methods. And in Germany, this research freedom is even protected by the German basic law, so it's rather difficult to restrict it. And this is a very often used argument when scientists or scientific organizations argue with politicians that want to regulate things. And as most of you here, I guess, know, many scientists in Germany feel over-regulated, especially in the life sciences. There's all these documentation procedures and review processes, and yeah, some even feel how do you say, paralyzed by all that, because you need a lot of resources and time to fulfill all these regulational needs and less time for science. Yeah, and on the other hand, and that's the reason why there is so much regulation in place, there are several risks of research which are kind of inherent in science and all innovative processes. If you achieve some new kind of benefit for society and for the good, of course, there could be people or even big group states that use the same knowledge to do some kind of harm in an unethical way. This is usually called misuse. There are also these unintended harmful consequences that at least from a political point of view, need to be regulated. Genetic engineering law is a typical example, which has a lot of regulation, and scientists don't like that very much. The term dual use was initially used for this dualism, mostly describing this civil versus military application, but we believe that it's oversimplifying the problem. It's more multiple use that you should talk about. This is not only military nowadays, what you have to talk about. There's also crime, terror, oppression, and so on. And we usually prefer the term security relevant research to describe that. And yeah, since there's all these wars around the world, there is disruptive technology progress, a lot of competition, at least to our the way we see the world. This is all increasing. There's this increasing struggle or competition between autocratic and democratic countries, and this creates a lot of pressure also on the sciences, which have been identified as security relevant for this competition. or relevant for this competition. So there's all this political pressure, and scientists nowadays are expected to live up to that, looking at national security interests, competitive disadvantages that may arise from, for example, free collaboration. There's a lot of discussion about dependencies, financial dependencies, research dependencies. A lot is happening in the US right now, which really illustrates us how much dependency there is, for example, in climate change. And there's also some things happening in science that people get afraid of, that there is some influence by foreign state actors on the sciences, so which is supposed to be looked at also by scientists. So there's a lot of complicated spheres now coming into the normal day-to-day work of scientists, and it's really difficult to keep all these processes in mind, and there's different terms used for that. So the typical one is research security being used. Now there's also the term knowledge security, and these changing framework conditions for science regularly raise these three questions, I would say. So what are the limits of research and research collaboration? Who determines these limits, and how are these limits enforced? And yeah, as was mentioned before, I work in this joint committee for the handling of security relevant research. This is a common committee organized by the Presidia of the German Research Foundation, DFG, and the German National Academy of Sciences, Leopoldina. And these two organizations, since a long time, they look into the risks of science and into how to find ways to deal with that in a self-regulatory way, as an opposite model for this regulatory way which politicians prefer. And this is kind of the mantra of the two organizations, that the sciences should themselves develop ethical principles and mechanisms for dealing responsibly with research freedom, research risks, because this has the big advantage that it's really more flexible and issue-focused, and these new laws and legal regulations are not as flexible as you would need for the very changing environment of science, content, and methods, and so on. So the two organizations really work hard on securing research freedom by strengthening this self-regulation in the sciences. And yeah, many of you may know these two studies from 2012. Basically, there were several incidents of bird flu virus infection in China, around 2010, 2011, and most of these several hundred people lived together with poultry in their homes, or had very close contact. So mostly chicken and ducks were carrying this virus, and so these people got infected by this close contact. So that was not an airborne transmission. And unfortunately, about 50% of the described cases ended lethally. So this was a very lethal virus, and research groups around the world or at least virologists were thinking what would need to happen, that this very lethal virus needs to mutate to get airborne transmitted among humans. And back then, two research groups, one from the Netherlands, one from Japan, independently identified only 5 mutations that were necessary that this virus could be transmitted airborne, at least in animal studies. They used ferrets back then. And one of the scientists, Ron Fouchier from the Netherlands, presented his data on a conference in Malta before it was published in a paper. And I think to gain attention, he said something like, "I may have created the biggest bioweapon of all times." And he got the attention that he wanted, of course. So there was a worldwide debate why scientists are allowed to do such kind of experiments. Shouldn't the state be somehow involved, for example, by export control? So if you publish knowledge like this, it could be seen as a manual for bioweapon, and also the virus in the lab could escape by negligence, and shouldn't that be regulated more harshly, and so on and so on. When Fritsch saw what he caused, he changed his wording a lot, actually. So he suddenly said, well, the ferrets in the experiments, they didn't even die, they hardly had any more symptoms, but the damage was done. So for 1 year around the world, there was a moratorium on these kind of gain-of-function experiments on viruses. There was a lot of discussion about these limits of pathogen research. Also, the governments tried to stop the publication in the US and in the Netherlands, but after all this discussion, it became clear that there's also a lot of benefit from this research, because these 5 mutations have now been identified, and if you see a similar epidemic as we see now in the US with a cow infection with the same virus, H5N1, and look if you can find these 5 mutations, you can really do a risk assessment how close these viruses are to get transmissible airborne. So I guess I said all that. Yeah, there was also a funding freeze in the US as a result to this discussion. So from 2014 till 2017, there was no NIH funding on gain-of-function research on influenza virus SARS. So this was the first variant, and also MERS, which is similar to SARS. The biological safety standards in labs were reassessed, which I believe was very important, because there's a very heterogeneous landscape of high security biolabs around the world. And this discussion also gave the impetus for the establishment of this joint committee I'm going to talk about soon. As a reaction also to this debate, DFG and Leopoldina published this recommendations for handling security-relevant research. So one of the central messages of this paper, which was published first in 2014, was that this security relevance exists in almost all areas of science, so not only in virology and life sciences. You see here a couple of examples. Nuclear research has been long discussed, it's not new, and you can make a very long list to identify scenarios of misuse, for example, of research. Recently, there's a lot of talk about artificial intelligence and machine learning, for example, with a view on this empowerment. So now people can easily gain knowledge which before they had to search with a lot of effort in many papers, and now these tools really make it easy to get all the relevant knowledge. For example, if you want to create some toxic substance or build some mechanical or electronic device that can help you to do harm. Yeah, maybe to give you some other concrete example for this enabling, there was a paper in 2022 that gained a lot of attention in the public and also in the media from scientists in Switzerland, I think UK, and also the US. What they actually did was they used a software that is usually used for predicting drug candidates in clinical studies that have as few as possible negative side effects, and they changed the parameters of this software, and within a couple of hours the software could identify several thousand highly toxic substances. Most of them were not known before, but also a couple of them were known to be the most described toxic nerve, how do you say, nerve weapon, nerval toxic, I guess, known to date. VX is one of the examples, so that gave a good indication that the software was really delivering dangerous stuff. And the researchers in the study were really surprised by this outcome, and they discussed, of course, a lot what they could publish of their work and what not. What they didn't publish was this list of toxins, but they wanted to publish the study to raise awareness of this risk of misuse of such AI tools, and this was back in 2022. Back then, for many of these substances, you may not even have had the pathway for synthesis. You may not know how stable these are, how they would enter the body and go to the place where they have their efficiency for the toxical, how do you say, the toxical effect. But nowadays, all these tools get more and more potent, so you can imagine that if you do the same study 3 years later, the results are really solid. And yeah, at the same time, when you raise awareness of this misuse potential, you could also spread the idea of such an abuse, and the researchers were aware of that. They published a couple more papers after that. But yeah, this is a very interesting study that I guess first showed the power of AI for such things. And maybe one more example, which many people are usually surprised by. Almost all peace and conflict research is also can be misused. Here's one of those examples. Many people are looking into how people get radicalized, so what are the susceptible groups and by which contents they get radicalized and become a terrorist, even as suicide bomber and so on. And of course the idea is to understand that and develop strategies for de-radicalization. But at the same time, if you publish your results, for example, some certain content in the internet works better for radicalization, and certain groups are very susceptible. At the same time, you give really ideas for these terror groups to even improve their strategies. So coming back to these recommendations, I better don't go into detail here because I don't have that much time, but basically there is a section for the individual researchers to document, communicate, mitigate risks, look in the final stage of your work. If you really want to publish everything, and as we heard before, if you retract some of your, or you don't publish some of your data, you have the trouble that it cannot be reproduced easily. But it's at least something researchers should think about, and there's also this section of recommendations for the research institutions that in the end set the framework condition for responsible research. And one of the very central recommendations was to establish local advisory committees on site that provide a service to scientists doing an ethical assessment of the work. Yeah, so how to define this kind of work where you need special attention? This is a very difficult thing, so it's not a solution to say something can be used militarily, and then it's a reason to look into that more deep with an ethical perspective. And DFG and Leopoldina developed this definition, which is very close to what has been used internationally for this term dual-use research of concern, which was initially used especially for life sciences, like this virology experiment I just described. And as you see here, or maybe I just read out loud. This is scientific work that has the potential to generate knowledge, products, or technologies that could be misused to harm human dignity, life, health, freedom, property, the environment, or peaceful coexistence. And this is labeled of concern if the misuse can occur directly and potential damage is significant. So these two words are very important as a indicator that researchers should more closely to what they are doing in their work or what they want to publish. And as you may know, there are many guidelines, recommendations, and so on published by research organizations. Sometimes they end up on a website and nobody knows about them. So DFG and Leopoldina installed this joint committee on the handling of security relevant research to really help to implement and monitor the implementation of these recommendations. And here you see the main task of the committee. And our focus is really on the implementation of these committees. We call them CAFs. This is a German acronym. And the committee doesn't do any case-by-case assessment. It's really more of a contact point for these committees. So research institutions and organizations really develop their own, their own way to deal with these risks in science. And yeah, you see, just to see who's in this committee, so we try to involve as many people from the recently discussed research topics as possible. Of course, you cannot put all experts in such a committee to deal or to handle all these topics, but we usually have 12 scientists. One will have a presentation later, Annalisa Alas. I didn't see her yet. She's a political scientist and also an expert in the science system in China. And we also have people from virology, law, ethics, microelectronics, and so on. And yeah, as I said, the committee tries to act as a platform for the bundled exchange. So we have extensive websites where we try to put together all the relevant information, like definitions on all these terms which are relevant, case studies like the three I just showed you. We have regular conferences emphasizing or talking about topics that are now in the focus, like neurotechnology was our last conference. We also had biometrics, chemical research, and so on. There's also recommendations and materials for teaching, since awareness is really key for this self-regulatory approach. It's important to already put these ethical aspects early in the careers, like teaching, and also in the process of research, for example, with summer schools and so on. And we also have a very long contact list with all these commissions that have been established in Germany. I will come to that in a minute. There's also a report every 2 years that tries to summarize all the currently relevant information, so you don't have to read every report every 2 years. We try really to put in all the information which is relevant, especially for the work of these committees in each report. And yeah, as this the topic of this conference, our last report had a focus on this geopolitical polarization, since this is a really important topic also for the commissions, which we hear from our surveys that more and more research collaborations are being discussed. And as far as I observe it, these commissions are kind of overwhelmed with all these new topics. Yeah, here this graph just illustrates what happened within the last 10 years. So in the beginning there was, there were only 4 committees dealing with this security relevant risks of research. Now there are more than 120 committees throughout Germany that give advice to about 300 research institutions in Germany. And there are also these contact persons, which are kind of our contact to provide information or get information back from these structures. And this is what we also got from our last 4 surveys. This gives you an idea in which research areas cases were being discussed in these committees. So as you see from these 124 cases that have been discussed between 2016 and 2022, most were from biology and engineering, and as you see, there was also geoscience, economics, and so on. Interestingly, from computer science, there were only 10. We would have expected many more. Already since a couple of years, this was an obvious topic, but we believe at this point this statistic more shows you the awareness in each discipline. So biology and engineering, they have a long-standing awareness for these research risks, and all the other research fields are just getting into contact with this topic. So of course scientists need to know that they have to reflect on their area of research if there is some sort of risk, and they need to know that there is a commission to go to, and this is the only way that this ends up in the statistics. Yeah, this you may be interested in the votes of these commissions. Unfortunately, we get very little information what is actually being discussed in these committees, since often these are very sensitive topics for each university, for example, that they don't want to put too much information out there, because I guess many are afraid of bad press, for example. And yeah, of the 94 advisory votes we got some knowledge of, there were 55 that really got an approval without any condition, and arguments were, for example, that it's pure basic research, the civilian use was exclusively, the benefits outweighed the risk of misuse, or the ethical monitoring was guaranteed. We see an increasing number of approvals with conditions set out by these committees. So, for example, you see the list there, educational measures for the scientists are being recommended. Public relation work needs to be regulated in advance before something is published that has a high risk of being misused. Some of these committees want the researcher to come back after some time when there is more data available from the research, and if it really proves high risk results, for example, and so on. And yeah, of these 94 advisory votes, we know of only 9 got a negative vote, and you see the arguments here. In one case, this committee feared that anti-constitutional information would spread with a survey, so they disapproved, but it's really a volunteer process. There was one case when the researcher couldn't name any civil use for his research, so it was obvious arms research, and this gave the impetus to disapprove in this case. Often there was some military connection of collaborators or sponsors that was a problem for the committee. Or as many of you know, in many German universities especially, there are civil clauses that hinder research with the aim of some military use. Could also be defense, but this discussion has a new dynamic in Germany right now. So it looks like defense becomes more acceptable, but offense is still a no-go for most universities. Yeah, and so we have now these more than 120 committees in Germany, and as you can imagine, with all these topics around that are associated with the risk of research, there are a lot of challenges. So the first and most obvious one is visibility and acceptance. So as far as we find out, many researchers don't know that there is such a committee at their institution that really provides a service. This is not really thought to be like a clearance. It's really a service for reflection, for example. But many don't know that there is this service. Many are kind of afraid that it could somehow stop their work or put it in a different direction, which they don't want to. So we think there are a lot of unreported cases that do not end up in the statistics, which is of course okay, but it's really important to get a feeling of how big this problem is, because the politicians are looking very closely at the processes at research institutions, because about 10 years ago there was a lot of discussion about new regulation for high-risk research that is not regulated yet, and this can end up very badly with many layers of bureaucracy, a lot of mistrust and so on. Yeah, responsibility and competence of these committees is also difficult. Yeah, the committees cannot cover all research topics themselves. Sometimes they need to get external expertise into the process. And there is often an overlap of ethical and legal issues, for example, export control. And as I said in the beginning, national security interests is this big new pressure from the political side that makes it difficult for these committees to really deal with, for example, collaboration with China, look into political agendas, certain institutes that have a military connection and so on. It's really not that easy to get all this knowledge. Yeah, many of the commissions really want uniform evaluation criteria, ideally a practical checklist. That is very difficult. Yeah, continuity is a problem. If the members of the committee change, a lot of knowledge is often lost. Usually this is an on-top voluntary work these committees do, and sometimes there could be a problem with the compatibility of a negative advisory vote with the freedom of research. Do I have 5 minutes? Okay, I try to excel. So yeah, I guess you already heard from my talk that it seems like that all this discussion about research security, and what I didn't mention yet, there is also a lot of political pressure that the academic sector shall take responsibility for the national security interests like defense and so on. So there is a lot of push of dual use research which is intended, and yeah, I basically named all these factors, and what you can expect from all these developments is that more projects become subject to secrecy, security protocols, restrictions on trusted personnel and international collaboration. So this basically would contradict the European ethos of academic science based on general accessibility of results, transparency and internationality. There have been a lot of papers from different research organizations reacting on this discussion on research security. I just named 2. One is from the DFG that were recommendations from 2023 that basically still put an emphasis on awareness and encouraging of reflections, and there are no general red lines with regard to partner countries, institutions and research topics. And also the German Science and Humanities Council just published in the beginning of this year a highly recognized paper, at least in the political sphere and also in the research organizations, where it noted that especially the German science system is, due to its openness, it's very vulnerable for all these influences from outside and knowledge leakage and so on. And what the Research Council saw in these processes to come, like this National Platform for Knowledge Security, which is basically political decision makers and scientists working together, having a common understanding of research security. And this is being set up now by the federal states, the government, and the research organizations. And they saw these commissions, or committees I just talked about, as a central role between the research institution and this new platform which is going to come. And this brings me to my last slide. So there is a responsibility of the scientists, of course, in dealing with security-relevant risks of research. The awareness of researchers for this self-regulation I mentioned is really key here. There are several research institutions now with these committees available for advisory service. And the security policy significance of science is growing, and at the same time the intentional dual-use research is planned to be expanded. So open science principles are under scrutiny due to this changed security perception and requirements, and the committee will continue its work. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for this inspiring talk. I've seen there is already a question from the online audience. I think we can start with that.
Okay, so the online audience is asking, for these research areas you highlighted as having high potential for multiple use, like the radicalization and virus research, could you give an example for how responsible handling could look like practically, also in light of the last talk on robust research practices?
Yeah, so I hoped I gave you some insights how the process would look according to the recommendations I mentioned in the beginning. So this is a lot about also having fantasy about what people could do with your results, and it's very important to reflect on that and not stay only in your own bubble. For example, virology sees risks different than, for example, sociology and so on. So if you have these interdisciplinary committees that give an opportunity for an interdisciplinary reflection, that may help. And it's also very important to ensure the trust in open science or free research by making things transparent, and also really think about the benefits, how to communicate them. If you just put out knowledge that you created a bioweapon and it could be the worst of all times, of course that doesn't help trust in science. So these committees can really help to also frame how to communicate research results that are of high risk. But it's of course it's a balance of publishing everything and holding back stuff that is too dangerous for some reason.
There was another question.
Yeah, in relation to what we learned in the first talk about the fact that big tech have much bigger computers and the governments are working with them. If you think about that, it means that any research we could do in AI and radicalization is probably also done there faster with bigger computers. So what would it serve to hide it if it's already out there? I mean, we probably already have AIs that are doing radicalization, so why would researcher needs to hide their research if it's already in the hands of the worst?
So hiding, hopefully that was not my message to hide results. It's more about really reflection and also communicating. So one thing which is important is to also tell the public that it's almost seen in all areas of research. So it doesn't make sense to put some risk regulation on just one area of research, because if you want to be consistent, you would have to do it with all areas. And also the knowledge that with all innovation usually comes some sort of misuse risk. This is important. I heard about some work where radicalization scientists work together with intelligence services. This is, for example, about monitoring social media communication to have an early hint that somebody would plan an attack. So, and I heard this one researcher who said the results were so, how do you say this, so helpful for preventing attacks that they shouldn't be made public. So these people who post a lot of stuff in social media just before, for example, they do a suicide attack, they don't get warned not to communicate in this way. You understand what I mean? So in this case, the researcher really made the decision not to share this with the public, only with the intelligence service. So at least to his talk, the knowledge now helps to prevent attacks like that, because you really have a system. It's about emotion, it's about a certain language to identify these people and prevent the attack. So maybe this is one of the examples where it makes sense not to publish everything, otherwise the language of terrorists could change in social media. Yeah, but I think there may be more examples, but most of them, for some reason, are not available to me, which you can imagine. But I think it's a lot about transparency, and sometimes we see that certain disciplines like IT science try to push away the responsibility that they all doing dual-use research. So you have to talk about that openly, and then you may get acceptance. Yeah, I hope that answered your question.
I think we could have one further question. Thomas?
Okay, thank you for your presentation. I have a very quick question. So I really like the idea of self-regulation in science, but at the same time I'm wondering a bit, what is the relationship between the level of threat, for example, by untraceable poisons, and the level of control the committees you mentioned have? So in my opinion, it's quite dangerous problem, and you said you need a lot of deliberation, many people involved to decide whether it can be published or not. So maybe you can say a few words regarding this tension between threats and academic freedom.
Yeah, so this is of course not an easy assessment, and most of these committees which we know about really only give advice. Yeah, this is not an obligatory. If the committee advises not to publish, doesn't automatically mean that the person will not publish, but maybe there will be some reflection on how to frame the data and so on. So it's often asked by people who like regulation if this is enough, if it's voluntary, and researchers don't really have to go, don't even have to go to the committee. They, in the end, they can still do free research as they wish, but that often depends on the debates with view on science, like this bird flu virus debate. Most of the people in the public, even politicians, don't really know how science works, and you have to be very careful how to protect your research freedom. And I'm not sure if I understood your question perfectly. Was that satisfying? Okay.
Okay, thanks again. Looking at the clock, I would like to proceed. Maybe you could ask your question directly during one of the breaks. So,
Thank you.